Artificial intelligence impacts much of our lives. For instance, AI decides what we get shown when we're online. But AI also reproduces racist and sexist stereotypes and often fails to detect hate speech, prejudiced AI, and what we can do about it. That's our topic on Shift today. AI is great at sorting through vast amounts of data and can do so much faster and more accurately than humans. It works using algorithms. But contrary to popular belief, these aren't neutral. In the past, black scientists found mainstream facial recognition systems to be better at recognizing white faces than people of color. Similarly, digital voice assistants like Siri or Alexa are best at understanding English, and best of all, at understanding the way white American computer programmers talk. And AI biases show up even in medicine.
In the US, hospitals widely use algorithms to allocate healthcare to patients. These are supposed to be bias-free, but researchers have found that decision-making algorithms often reproduce racial or gender stereotypes. One study investigated an algorithm used in the US, which assigned risk scores to patients on the basis of total healthcare costs accrued annually. It found that black patients were generally assigned lower risk scores than equally sick white patients, and thus were less likely to be referred to programs that provide more personalized care. In other words, people's ethnicity was impacting the care they received.
The fact that AI use in medicine is leading to black people receiving less medical care than white people in the US is truly shocking. It shows that we over-rely on AI and that we aren't careful enough about which data we use to train these machine learning algorithms. But who decides what gets used? And how does AI learn? Clearly, there's still room for improvement.
AI systems are trained using data sets. Their algorithms learn to solve problems independently through repetition. In deep learning with neural networks, AI can also learn to solve new, more complex tasks. What an AI learns depends on the data it is fed, and this is often linked to who the programmers are. Take Google's image recognition software. In 2015, it made headlines when it labeled photos of black people as gorillas. The shocking mistake was due to the fact that for the category human, the software had been trained using millions of photos of white people, but hardly any of people of color. So the algorithm had only learned to recognize white people as humans. Datasets are usually assembled by scientists. In the case of Google's image recognition software, these were predominantly white men. They probably didn't intentionally leave out photos of people of color. They simply didn't consider the impact a lack of diversity in their dataset would have. The AI thus produced a new form of old discrimination. This shows how important diversity is. If it is lacking in a dataset, an AI trained using that data will develop blind spots.
When it comes to data and AI, the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. Another compounding factor is that algorithms are mainly developed by tech companies and classified as trade secrets. Many companies have said that they themselves don't understand exactly how their algorithms work, including Meta, Facebook's parent company. From an economic standpoint, the secrecy is understandable, says German tech writer Thomas Ramge.
The fact that the most data-rich companies are also the best at using AI and are the most valuable companies in the world are closely connected. Currently, data is the most important resource for creating value.
And right now, tech companies are actually profiting from biased AI. Much is being done to change this, and researchers are trying to figure out how to program fair algorithms, including a team at the IT University of Copenhagen in Denmark.
Teaching an algorithm to spot discrimination is difficult because we often do not agree about what is discriminatory. To create a more nuanced understanding of misogyny, for instance, the IT University of Copenhagen assembled a diverse team to identify sexism in online content. The 8 team members were men and women with different ages, nationalities and professions. They looked at thousands of Facebook, Reddit and Twitter posts from 2020. The different team members had diverging worldviews. This helped them more accurately label data used to train AI, because they were able to spot more nuances of misogyny.
But making datasets more diverse wouldn't solve all of these problems. Another issue is that internationally active companies often do not have international teams. Staff do not speak the languages of the countries their products are used in, let alone understand the culture. Examples like Myanmar, where Facebook was weaponized in the mass attack on the Rohingya, show how dangerous this can be.
What we see on social media is largely determined by algorithms. They decide which posts appear where on our feed and which ads we are shown. Algorithms also decide what we aren't shown, and they are supposed to filter out violent content or hate speech. But such filters largely only work for English content. One of the people who has spoken out about this is Frances Haugen, former Facebook employee turned whistleblower.
So when I joined Facebook, I became aware of how severe the problem was in places outside the United States. How Facebook's underinvestment in solutions that can work in a linguistically diverse way, in a world where not everyone speaks English, that because they'd underinvested in those things, they were really setting the stage for what I saw was going to be a very, very scary next decade or 2 decades.
One recent example is Ethiopia, where a civil war has raged since 2020, and where content posted on Facebook has incited further acts of violence. Why wasn't this content flagged? One reason is that very few Facebook content moderators speak local languages.
I knew that Myanmar had happened, that there had been a mass killing event as a result of that was fanned by social media. But I had no idea that we were about to see chapter after chapter unfold.
Facebook is used worldwide, but the platform's safeguards protect mainly those in English-speaking countries. Often the most vulnerable are the least protected.
Personally, I would much prefer if Mark Zuckerberg were investing millions in addressing these problems rather than in his new metaverse project. Ayo Tometi, formerly known as Opal Tometi, is the co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. She says, Facebook has social obligations it's failing to meet.
They need to make their platforms explicitly anti-racist. They need to protect human rights defenders. They need to protect marginalized and vulnerable communities. That is the duty that they have first and foremost. That has to be safe. We have to pay attention to these types of, if it's algorithms or various ways in which that race sometimes gets diminished or swept to the side or not considered really.
This is precisely what the research team at the IT University of Copenhagen are trying to do. Their goal is to teach AI to recognize hate speech and sexism in different cultural contexts.
When it comes to creating data sets used to train AI, diversity matters. As the research group at the IT University of Copenhagen found, missing viewpoints lead to mistakes.
With hate speech annotation, one of the really tricky things is that sometimes just one minority, one group of people, one small subset of people know the answer, right? So in our group, often we find that everyone would have an agreement about something, but one person would disagree. There was at least one person on the team who was Muslim, and she recognized a couple of words that are always used to refer to Muslims in a very derogatory way that the rest of the group didn't know.
Groups being underrepresented in data leads to biases in AI. What's more, artificial intelligence is constantly learning. If there isn't much content expressing a given viewpoint online, AI can falsely assume that viewpoint is a minority opinion.
So if we have, maybe imagine there's a lot of misogyny online, not too hard to imagine, then women maybe don't want to interact in those spaces too much. Everyone has better things to do, right? So then we'll start thinking that views talking about fair employment for the sexes actually is an extremist view because we don't see that view, right?
The IT University Research Group is developing AI that can spot discriminatory content and hate speech online, and that doesn't consider only one worldview. The challenge is that online content is often ambiguous. As a result, creating accurate tags for training the AI is difficult.
One example here could be, I hate all Danish people. We have a list of all identities. We have Danish people and English people and whatever it may be. Then we have a gold label, so what is this hateful or not towards an identity? So what direction are we here in is it a more general, so do we hate all Danish people or do we hate Danish people like me?
The algorithm will be completed in a few months, and it may prove useful for tech companies to improve their content moderation.
We urgently need solutions for dealing with online hate speech. At the moment, we're still relying heavily on human moderators, which leads to problems, say the researchers in Denmark.
Moderation is tough because there's a lot of abusive, violent, unpleasant content online. And it can come out at any time of day, and the impact is when people see it, right? It's not when they interact with it. If people have seen it and then reported it, already it's maybe a little bit too late.
A number of content moderators have suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, which goes to show just how tough the job is. But as we've seen, we can't leave this task to AI, especially when it comes to complex topics. For instance, the Delphi project by the US research institute AI2 had no problem getting clear answers from their chatbot for questions like whether the Earth is flat. We know it's round, so the chatbot did as well. But the bot initially described abortion as murder. The researchers then tweaked it so that it said abortion is acceptable. But this goes to show that AI cannot answer questions regarding moral issues that we as a society have different views on. Or to put it another way, how can we expect AI to know things we don't know? And should we even be going to AI for answers? What's your take on AI? Do we rely on it too much? Or are issues like bias just minor problems that need fixing? Let us know in the comments on YouTube and DW.com. That's all from me for today. Goodbye.